Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Environmental Justice Now. My name is Leah Jones, and I am the Education Coordinator here at Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. Thank you so much for being here today. It's good to be back with you all. I am so excited to be back on the Facebook Live screen with you all today because I have the pleasure of introducing a new team member here at VAIPL. Hira Azher. So good to have you. She has been a great light and a joy to be around since joining the team. Even after just a few weeks, I can already tell that she's a genuine person and is unafraid to speak her mind. So we are so lucky to have her as our new communications and digital outreach coordinator, and just to have another activist who is such a great person in the fight for justice. So, hello, Hira, how are you doing today?
Hello, I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here and be kind of on the screen for the first time instead of behind the scenes. And before we start, I just wanted to start us off with a little land acknowledgement. While we are on a video call and many of us are joining from different places, we want to remind ourselves that we gather on the unceded land of Indigenous peoples. Currently, I am located on the land of the Yugonund and Powhatan people. And if you are unsure of whose land you're on and want to find out, you can always visit native-land.ca to find out.
Thanks so much for that. Such an important part. And as we should always be thinking about those that came before us and those who are native to the lands that we reside on today. So just to open us up, just tell us who you are. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself, what you're passionate about, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so my name is Hira Azher. I use she, her pronouns, and I am from the 757 from Virginia Beach. And I recently just graduated from the University of Virginia, where I majored in global development studies and medical anthropology, which is like super interesting, a little bit different than what I'm doing now, but it's really cool to see all those perspectives come together. And while I was in school, I worked as a photographer and a photography coordinator for the University of Virginia's intramural and recreational sports department. So that's a lot of where my passion is. I love photography and the communication and media aspect that comes with that. And then I also volunteered in EMS as an EMT for the Charlottesville Albemarle Rescue Squad. And that is another thing that I really enjoy and am passionate about. And other than that, aside from those things, I would say I'm really interested in racial justice and also the possibilities of transformative justice and other alternatives to prisons and policing.
Great. That's so awesome. I'm like, you've done so many things. You're right. You're kind of like multifaceted in that way. You can do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And obviously it's for the better. So I guess now I just was wondering if you've always been interested in environmental issues, it's like I said, from what you described thus far, from your interests and your passions, I can tell you do care about racial justice and transformative justice. So was environmental justice always a part of that, or is that something you're kind of new to?
Yeah, to be honest, no, it really wasn't. It wasn't something that I thought about often. And I think a lot of that is because of the way that I grew up, and many of us in the States grew up thinking of environmental justice through a very kind of neoliberal understanding of it being this sort of space where, when I thought of environmental justice, I thought of people telling us to recycle, or the newer age, like veganism and vegetarian movement, which at the end of the day are really whitewashed movements. And I didn't think about the kind of deeper justice aspect of that. And so when I was actually kind of like brought into this issue was towards the beginning of my university career and journey. And I was in a class called Rethinking Nature, where I read this book that was like a huge perspective shift. It was called The Great Derangement by Amitav Ghosh. And it was basically kind of what I took away from the book was the idea that climate change disproportionately affects what are considered developing nations, which have actually contributed least to the problems. And that was a perspective of environmental justice that I was never given growing up. It was very much like, from the scientific aspect, there's carbon pollution, greenhouse gases, the earth is getting warmer. But when it came to actually talking about the people that were most affected, I never learned about that. So reading that book, the author himself is from India, and I'm from Pakistan, which is the bordering country. And so being from Pakistan, I could directly see what he was talking about. And if some of y'all know, in 2010, Pakistan was hit with major floods. And it began like during the monsoon season right around now. And 20 million people were affected, and many folks lost their lands and their livelihood. And because it is kind of an agricultural economy and has limited infrastructure, people today are still recovering from that like devastating disaster. And when we talk about climate change, we also talk about everything that comes with that. So diseases like cholera were spread, and all the previously existing inequities were just further exacerbated. So like an example of that is also with the melting of the glaciers in the Himalayas and the flooding of the Arabian Sea. It's clear that like the sea level is rising, and the countries that it's hurting the most are the ones that don't have the proper or resources and the proper infrastructure for that. And so another thing I found out when reading that book was that the US and other quote unquote developed nations also actually export their waste to developing nations. One of the big ones in the past have been China, but Pakistan is also included in that. And so when I think about kind of where my understanding, thinking about recycling companies and how that was my understanding of environmentalism, to later learn that many of these recycling companies were just exporting the plastic waste to developing nations, including my own. And so that really brought into perspective the different areas of environmental justice. And even now, Pakistan continues to face catastrophic flooding, droughts, cyclones, and all the things that we know are related to the warming of the earth and the climate crisis. And even right now, earlier this week, Jacobabad, which is a city in the Sindh province of Pakistan, has been the hottest place on earth. And it was 126 degrees Fahrenheit, I believe, either Tuesday or Wednesday, which is literally above the human threshold for heat. So it becomes really clear that for me, it was no longer an option to like disengage from climate justice or environmental justice when it's like quite literally killing my people. And I think this also, like joining VAIPL, and more recently, I've realized that's very true for people locally and people in the States, where I mentioned earlier, I'm from Virginia Beach, and we know that Hampton Roads has a huge flooding problem, which we've talked about before. It has the highest rates of sea level rise among the entire Atlantic seaboard. And I was doing some research, and I found out that in Norfolk, there are actually 1,700 public housing units spread over 3 neighborhoods, which are the Tidewater Gardens, Calvert Square, and Young Terrace, which make up this area known as the St. Paul's Quadrant. And every single one of these homes in this public housing area is in a flood zone. And so from the very start, these marginalized communities have lacked proper environmental infrastructures. And when we talk about like histories of redlining, they've pushed resources away from these marginalized communities, and we get extremely under-resourced areas. And it becomes really clear also that I think these issues of environmental justice, even though it seems like they're kind of naturalized, the reality is that a lot of them are intentional and manufactured. And even in responding to these, we've seen the response for these communities, which are predominantly Black communities as well, has been to push them even further out of the city. The response to like the sea level rising and the flooding isn't to give them the resources or the proper infrastructure or actually fight for climate justice. It's been to just keep pushing these folks out. So it becomes really clear to me that like not engaging in environmental justice does a lot more harm when there's people who are already hurting from it, and it's like the most marginalized people that are being hurt the most.
And I think you sharing that, thanks so much for sharing all those amazing details, one, about, and just your own personal experience and personal connections to what you've seen in one, Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Hampton Roads area, and also in Pakistan. It's incredible to think about how, even though worlds apart, we're still seeing like similar issues in different ways, right? And on different scales as well. But it lets us know that environmental justice, environmental issues is way, way bigger than, like you said, what we learn in school about planting trees and putting the right recyclables in the right bins. You know, it's personal. It's really about the lives of people and how it affects your quality of life, along with like as the globe is changing and the earth is degrading. People's lives are also at stake, you know, and dramatically affected. So yeah, I think that's a very astute observation. And I think in many ways, when we do fight for environmental justice, an easy way to get so, like, even for me, and I think a lot of activists, it is because it's personal, that you feel so compelled to, like, as you said, not have an option and have to speak out about it and do something. So, and there's so much to be done. So it's really, it can be overwhelming, but we won't go down that rabbit hole right now. But I guess you also touched on it a bit already, but I was wondering what brought you to VAIPL specifically, you know, especially as you did begin to learn about these issues, and you are coming right out of UVA. So what brought you here to us?
Yeah, so I think I knew that graduating from school, I wanted to work in a very grassroots justice organization. I didn't want to do top-down stuff. I wanted to work in communities where I could grow to know the people and like actually be a trusted person in a community. And I think that is where I found that VAIPL was really, really good at doing grassroots work and doing the same kind of like grassroots initiatives that I'd always like admired and I always thought were very, very meaningful. And then I also wanted to do something kind of local because like you said, it can be kind of scary to go down the rabbit hole of like all of the environmental justice issues in the world. And like being from one place, I think that's also the easiest way to like actually know people and do the meaningful work is if you live in the communities that you're doing the work in and if you are around spaces that you've been for a while. So I wanted to do something kind of local. And those were like the two things that kind of pushed me towards VAIPL. But more importantly, it was the really justice focused framework of doing environmental justice that prioritizes marginalized folks and marginalized communities. And is very like unapologetic and intentional about that. And I think that's embodied in VAIPL staff is we have like staff that are entirely people of color. And that's something that we like pride ourselves on and know that is like in order to help marginalized communities, you have to have marginalized communities at the table doing these discussions, talking about these issues. And then lastly, I was really interested in the opportunity to connect my faith and my faith community to like a job. That's not something I had ever known existed or that like I had thought I could do in bringing like this kind of spiritual aspect into the actual work that we do and the stuff that we do on a day-to-day 9 to 5, being able to bring those two things together was really exciting for me.
I feel you wholeheartedly on the spiritual and bringing faith along with my actual literal day-to-day job. That is something before VIPL I never even considered as a possibility, you know? And I've said this a bunch of times now, but one thing that I feel like I'll always remember is when I first started at VIPL, and I don't remember what discussion we were having, but Faith Harris was the one who said something about her work, her doing this work is a form of worship for her. And ever since then, it made me say, you know what? Yeah, it is. And it gives you a whole different perspective and a whole nother motivator for this type of, or motivation for this type of work. So definitely unique being here at Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. So yeah, we're happy to have you, you know what I mean? But I guess I was also wanting to ask, you touched on it a bit, just going off of the last question. How do you feel like this work specifically connects to your own personal faith and your own personal spirituality?
Yeah, I think one thing I've been thinking about recently, and by recently I mean over the past couple of years, is that I think for me and kind of for a lot of folks, especially for my Muslim faith, that spiritual peace can only exist and be attained with justice and social justice. And as a Muslim myself, I think I'm very inspired by the stories of our ancestors and the people that came before us, and specifically Prophet Muhammad and Imam Hussein. And growing up, I've always heard this saying about Prophet Muhammad, who is considered our last prophet, where he stated that if you ever witness injustice, you must change it. And when you're in the attempts to do that, you must first try to change it with your hand. So that means like trying to do something directly, something physical. Like if you see something, doing something immediately to fix that injustice. And then it was, if you can't do that, then do it with your tongue, which means speak out about it, do advocacy, try to stop it from that way. And the last part is, even if you can't do that, at least know it in your heart that something is unjust and that is something that you have to fight against. And I think growing up with powerful stories like that made it very clear to me that like injustice is fighting against injustice is an integral part of being a Muslim. And I think a lot of faith communities have that, where justice is something that is worship and that is so powerful in our attempts to be a good person or a spiritual person or a faithful person. And over the past couple of years, I've also been learning more about the kind of like Shia history of Islam. I grew up as a Sunni Muslim, so I didn't know much of that growing up. And one story that I'm really in awe of is the story of Karbala. And I don't want to get into like too much theology or history, but essentially Karbala was a battle against an oppressive and unjust ruler. And the people in resistance included Imam Hussein and 72 of his followers and family against an entire army of a huge nation. So they went into battle knowing that likely they would be killed and they wouldn't be survived in fighting. But they wanted to fight against injustice so bad that they still went into the battle knowing that. And all of the supporters still went into this battle knowing that this could kill them, but that this was an important fight against injustice. And so Imam Hussein actually was martyred during that battle on a day that is now known as Ashura. And so in referring to this history, there's a common saying that every land is Karbala and every day is Ashura, which essentially means that the fight for justice continues in every single moment of our life. And I don't think environmental justice is any exception to that. And so when I think about like, how does my faith and environmental justice connect, it's hard to like separate them at all, because it's like, if justice is so integral to your faith, you can't not fight for environmental justice and still feel faithfully fulfilled and feel like spiritually fulfilled. And then I think in like the modern day sense, I'm also really inspired by Muslim leaders like Malcolm X and Suad Abdul Khabir, who continue to immortalize the history of fighting for justice with the struggles of being a Muslim, especially in the United States.
Right. And I feel like after the past few weeks of working here, especially, something that you see across faiths as a general principle is just the concept of like acting on justice as a form of caring for your neighbors and loving your neighbors. So very much relevant, very much a humbling story as well to keep in mind on a day-to-day basis, and you feel like you're about to take on entire armies of industry and really like people who have a ton of money behind them or a ton of support, governmental support. It can sometimes feel like, what are my actions alone going to do? What is anything that I do? Is it really going to make a difference? Is it really possible that I can make a difference? And I feel like stories like what you just said, what you grew up on, and also just general principles that we've grown up with along with our faiths, teach us that it does make a difference, and it's a part of having faith, right? And being a whole person. So very important. And thanks again for sharing that. So how do you feel like you bring your environmental interests and environmental activism to your own faith community? Especially since you did speak about how you do already have these principles that reflect that, how have you in the past or currently or even maybe future, if you haven't at all, how do those things connect for you?
Yeah, so I think, like I briefly mentioned before, it's kind of inseparable. Like I think I myself don't necessarily bring as much because I feel like so much of it is already there, and it's more of just kind of pushing what's already existing. And I think so many beliefs of environmental justice and environmental activism are already present in Muslim spaces. And I think when I think about this, one of the first things that comes to my mind is the month of Ramadan, which is when Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset for 30 days. And I think what this month means for me is that it is a very intentional fight against kind of this idea of like hyper consumerism and gluttony and all of the stuff that we know is very related to the climate crisis. When you talk about like these armies of corporations always selling us things and telling us we need all these things that are at the end of the day degrading our planet, it seems like to me Ramadan, and our communities, it's like Ramadan is a very intentional fight to not do that and to resist against that. And it's a reminder of a life that is unbound by capitalism and doesn't require this constant consumption and degradation of our communities. And we, in that, are also trying to just like on the day minimize our waste and live intentionally and with mindfulness. And so when thinking about that, I'm like, wow, a lot of these concepts are already here. They were literally built into the religion for us. And like, we definitely forget it and we definitely move away from that. But having that month is such a nice reminder of like what we're here for and what we're here to do. And I think also of the concept of wudu, which is the ablution or washing of our bodies before we pray. And for most Muslims, depending on different like prayer practices, a lot of Muslims pray 5 times a day. So they do wudu 5 times a day. And it's like a very literal and physical connection to nature and our environment. Like you're washing yourself with water, and in that process, the water literally has the quality of like protecting you and caring for you and cleansing you. And so in that, I'm like, wow, a lot of these ideas of our environment and environmental justice have already been here. If we know that like water has these spiritual properties and abilities to help us and care for us, how could we not also care for the environment back? And so I think like you said, these properties or these concepts exist already, and sometimes we get distracted and like we live in a world that does perpetuate environmental harm. And so I think for a lot of me trying to bring that into the communities I'm already in is just a lot of reframing of what environmental justice is, just like the reframing I had to do for myself of like trying to understand who is environmental justice helping? What is environmental justice doing? I think it's doing the same thing in those faith communities as well. And I think an example of that happened this past year when I was at UVA. I was part of this org called Muslims United, which was an organization dedicated towards creating a safe and inclusive space for marginalized Muslims and simultaneously fighting against injustice. And so in that, this past Ramadan, we decided to put on a sustainable community iftar event. And there's a little video clip that should pop up. Think about bringing this into our faith community, where we tried to create an event that was zero waste, and we asked everybody to bring their own Tupperware to the event so that we wouldn't be trying to create any sort of plastic waste. And that went right into the themes of Ramadan, which are like not to be wasteful and to be mindful. And then along with that, we also thought on the larger scale of like, well, where are we getting the food from? What corporations are we supporting if we go to these different places? And we ended up deciding to have the food cooked by a local Syrian chef who was also a recently immigrated refugee. Her name is Nada. She cooked amazing food. But in doing that, it was also this intersectional approach to environmental justice. Like, yes, part of sustainability is also sustaining the community that you're in and the people that are there with you. And so I think that is kind of how I've tried to frame environmental justice with my faith and with my faith community, and knowing that what I'm doing is nothing new. Like, there were people before me who had these same ideas, who made it able for me to push this even farther. And so much of this framework of environmental justice is already rooted within our faiths, but just trying to reframe it so that we understand the role that we're playing in it and the position that we have.
Absolutely. Yes. I see a comment now. Intersectionality. That's literally what I was going to say. Just putting together, like when you have events like your iftar event, your sustainable iftar event that you were just talking about, and also just thinking about reflecting, taking a step back and thinking about all of the different ways that we are interconnected, and how actually caring for the environment actually does remind us that we are all a part of this same world, right? And to really thrive the most, like to have the most opportunities to thrive, we have to work together. So it's a great example of how we see that just on a regular day-to-day basis, doing basic community things like having events, but also thinking about the different ways that we can collaborate and use our own, what makes us better for everyone, so definitely important things to keep in mind in the fight for justice and just really going through life. I think we're coming towards the end of our time here today. So thank you so much for being here today, Hira. It's been a pleasure learning more about you. I actually have genuinely learned more about you. So this has been great.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. It was exciting to actually talk about this. And I've had these ideas, but to actually have a conversation about it is always so nice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like I want to give you a moment first to share if there's anything else you would like to speak out to the people while we're on the show. Any closing thoughts before I close this out today?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think I shared a bunch of streams in my head. But as always, if you ever are interested in partnering with VAIPL, or if any of the ideas we were talking about sound exciting to you, feel free to check out our website, which is vaipl.com, or contact us. And we love doing all of this stuff. So please reach out.
Yes, please reach out, and please join our newsletter that we do weekly. You can join us there at the link listed below to keep up to date with us and hear about all of the exciting things we have coming and that are in progress. One thing that I would like to flag for everyone especially is our upcoming town hall event that we're having on the 22nd of July. So in just a few weeks, we'll be having a town hall event. It is going to be virtual, so everyone can attend. It's also going to be free. It's going to be just an hour of your time. And there we will be learning more about the American Jobs Plan. We plan to have an exciting and knowledgeable panel, so it'll be great to attend and get some more info. Just discuss the different ways that the American Jobs Plan can really change our infrastructure even here in Virginia. So yes, definitely check that out. I feel like the registration for the event or the Facebook event itself will be in our own comments of this live show right now. So once again, check that out, and also sign up to receive our e-newsletter to stay up to date on the town hall and all the other amazing things that we have coming up. So thank you all again so much for being here and tuning in today, and for participating, being a live and active audience. We love it over here, and we will see you all next week, same time, same place. All right. Thanks so much. Bye.